We're going to turn now to our contributor and frequent guest, Shir Hever. Let's see if I can there we go. Shir joined us about a month ago for an episode of the Standalone podcast to talk about Israel's internal collapse, but we wanted to bring him back on today to talk about the significant developments in terms of the further disintegration of the Israeli economy as its genocide and war of attrition drags on. Shir, thank you so much for coming back with us today.
Thanks for having me. Even though it's not easy to follow Abu Bakr, it was really a heartbreaking interview, but a very important one.
Yeah, indeed. Well, there's a lot to cover. Let's start by talking about the giant microchip maker Intel announcing that it's halting plans for a $25 billion chip making plant in Kiryat Gat, even though Intel said in a statement earlier this month that it is, quote, fully committed to the region. It pointed to adapting to so-called changing timelines, and that, quote, our decisions are based on business conditions, market dynamics, and responsible capital management. Can you make sense of this boilerplate tech speak and what it means in terms of Israel's tech industry collapsing?
Yeah, well, this text that they published is a big bunch of nothing, of course, but I think that is part of the story. The Intel deciding to cancel their biggest investment in the Israeli economy ever is probably the biggest victory of BDS in history. We've done a lot of research about Intel, which is such an important pillar of the Israeli economy and so complicit in the system of oppression. And found not only that Intel has reported that more than 7% of their employees in Israel are reservists who are actually not showing up to work because they are going into Gaza and killing people. But also we found that the chip that Intel is producing is embedded into an Elbit Systems weapon, which is sold as a enhancer of the lethality of infantry. Something that the Dutch military is buying a lot of this, and the Dutch army has been complaining that the system isn't working, and which is not surprising considering the fact that Elbit Systems has never tested their weapons against the conventional army, but only in the course of oppressing Palestinians and killing civilians. So Intel, with these discoveries, Intel was in a very difficult situation, and any kind of investment in a state which is in rapid collapse, economically, socially, politically, ostracized by the whole world. This is just irresponsible from a very corporate capitalistic point of view of Intel's responsibility to its own investors. So they made the statement that they're going to cancel the investment of the $25 billion that Israel was desperately hoping to see as an inflow of foreign currency and when all other investments have dried up. And then there was a statement which was covered in all the Israeli newspapers saying that this is not a cancellation of the investment. It is actually only just postponing it. It's because of technical issues. It's because of the Turkish sanctions on dual-use items, which makes it difficult for the subcontractors that Intel has hired to build the factory. They don't get the materials. The only problem with these statements, none of them come from Intel. They only came from the Israeli government, who was making excuses for Intel, because the alternative would be to acknowledge the fact that the Israeli economy is simply not working. And they cannot make that statement. So from Intel, the only thing we hear is this silence, which is silence with a lot of words that you've just read out to us. But they're not saying anything really. I think this would explain also why the share price of Intel has plummeted, because investors don't understand what's going on. They see the company canceling the investment and not explaining anything about it. But I think we can understand what's really happening, which is actually that Intel made a sound financial decision. They are not going to invest in Israel.
Well, that's definitely good news, and we hope that it's something that many other companies will follow suit on. Another major industry, of course, Israel advertises itself as a high-tech haven, even though that is now collapsing. Um, but also the arms industry. According to recently released figures, 2023 was a record year for Israel's arms exports. But of course, most of that was before the events of October 7th. I'm going to get your opinion on that. But first, let's take a look at a couple of recent videos. The first one here shows Hezbollah, the Lebanese resistance organization, shooting down an Israeli Hermes drone. Let's take a look at that. And that we're watching, for those who are listening, a viewfinder of a missile, and it's we see the drone in the distance. It's a black and white image, and boom, the drone tumbles out of the sky. So that's the first video I want to show. The second one, again, it's just another brief clip that we can go to now, is Hezbollah forces attacking and apparently destroying an Iron Dome missile battery. Let's take a look at that. And again, we're seeing these this is a clip released by Hezbollah. John Elmer showed us these in a recent episode, and then this is basically the footage again supplied by Hezbollah, them showing one of their drones attacking the Iron Dome battery and severely damaging or destroying it. And Shir, the reason I wanted to show those particular clips is because both the Hermes drone and Iron Dome are sort of flagships of Israel's arms industry and military exports. Can you talk about what videos like this and Israel's other military failures in the last 9 months mean for Israel's military reputation and arms sales? What do you see going on with Israel's arms industry more generally?
As impressive as these videos may be, I'm not sure that they are what makes a difference, because I think that there are two kinds of customers for the Israeli weapons. There are the customers which are mostly global South countries, especially authoritarian regimes, which are using Israeli weapons to oppress their own people. And the Israeli arms industry has become a source of global harm for the whole world. And then the weapons that have become the trademark of the Israeli arms industry. The Hermes drones are part of it, but not so much the Iron Dome, but also things like spyware, surveillance equipment, and incarceration equipment, facial recognition. So really tools of oppression. And when we're talking about these customers, the sales of the Israeli arms industry have plummeted. And that's very interesting, with the possible exception of Morocco, which is still very much interested in those very technologies which they're using against the Sahrawis, as they see a very close parallel between the occupation of West Sahara and the Israeli occupation of Palestine. But these customers, most of them, because they are from countries which have lived through colonialism, they can see the process of decolonization and the collapse of the Israeli power. And they are just, from a very pragmatic point of view, not a moral point of view, unfortunately, are saying there's no point in signing a contract and buying a weapon that will arrive in a couple of months or years and will require maintenance and support and training from an industry which is at a dead end. One notable exception is India, which is, of course, a country with a long colonial history. India is selling weapons to Israel, but not buying so much. So again, they don't see any reason of signing a contract to buy weapons that may or may not arrive. But they are selling, because why not make a profit right now, even though they don't necessarily think that they'll be able to keep this customer for much longer. And I think it's very good if we also spend a couple of minutes just to talk about the legal aspects and the consequences of that element of the arms industry. But the other customers, I said there are two kinds. The others are the European states, which are complicit in supporting the genocide. And those are still buying Israeli weapons, even after October 7, even after the genocide has become undeniable. And this is really the point where I would very much like to talk about the legal side of things. But because you mentioned this particular report and these statistics, let's just reflect on the fact that in the Israeli media, they were not able to make that very simple distinction that you made, saying these are numbers from before October 7. So they are presenting it falsely, even in the headlines, as if Israel's war in Gaza is a boost to its arms exports, which is simply false. But a more interesting analysis of this data going up until October 7 is that they're acknowledging that the biggest chunk of weapons that Israel is selling are air defense systems. And then you might say, oh, this is the Iron Dome, but actually that's not the Iron Dome. There is another air defense system that Israel is selling, which is called Arrow 3. And Arrow 3 is a system that is only sold to one country, which is Germany. But because Germany is paying 4 billion euros for the Arrow 3, it has become the biggest item on the export, and it is about more than 30% of the total export for 2023. So without the Arrow 3 contract, the year 2023 would not have been a peak year in Israeli arms exports. Let's just focus on that particular deal, which has been done so terribly. I mean, just from the point of view of the stupidity involved. I've been following questions to the Bundestag, the German parliament, about this deal. And they asked the government, how much are you going to pay for the Arrow 3? And they said, well, we can't give you numbers because that would undermine the negotiation process. But there's no way we can put a budget of more than 3.5 billion euros for this. So the Israelis just read the answers from government and said, okay, so the price is 4 billion. And that's what they got. And just shows the stupidity of the German Ministry of Defense. And a professor in Germany commented that the Arrow 3 system, which is, by the way, completely untested, never used in history, and nobody knows if it works or not. We know that there's Arrow 2, and Arrow 2 fell in Syrian territory. There was a misfire launching of Arrow 2. The Syrian army sent the Arrow 2 missile to Russia to study it and analyze it. So if Germany is buying the Arrow 3 system, one has to ask against whom exactly. and I guess all Germans would immediately tell you, well, in case Russia will send missiles to Germany, well, the one country that knows how to bypass the Arrow 3 system is Russia. And the Arrow 3 system is actually designed to intercept exo-atmospheric missiles. Russia doesn't have any. So in order to somehow defend this very stupid deal, which makes no sense whatsoever, when Houthis fired missiles at Israel, Israel claimed that they used the Arrow system to intercept them. And then if you read the small letters, they actually said, yeah, it was Arrow 2. But it was presented as we've just tested the system that we're selling to Germany, even though these were not exo-atmospheric missiles. Arrow 3 is still completely untested. If you don't mind, I wanted to say something about the legal issue here, because that's another very important part of the work that the BNC is doing, the Boycott National Committee of the BDS movement, is to try to make legal analysis, like which we get mostly from El Haq, but also to publish it and to distribute it, because there is a legal obligation of third states in a case of war crimes, and especially in a case of genocide, but not just genocide, that they have a legal obligation not only to stop selling weapons to Israel, but also not to buy weapons from Israel, because they're financing the genocide. They're financing the arms companies which are making the weapons for the Israeli military. And it's also illegal to transit the weapons. So this is very important also for our viewers and listeners to know that when we call for a military embargo, we're just calling on states to enforce, to respect international law. This is illegal. And because the countries that are arming Israel are Western countries, the Western democracies that claim to be the big defenders of international law, we actually have a lot of leverage to launch lawsuits and to stop the weapons.
And is that being prepared at all? Like, especially in terms of, I mean, these possible arrest warrants coming from the International Criminal Court, all the rulings of the International Court of Justice. There are people here in the US, for example, who are trying to get the US government to adhere to its own Leahy law, which is the Arms Export Act. Is there any legal recourse that's happening now, and where do you see that going?
It's happening in parallel in many different countries. We've already had some success in the Netherlands, even more success in Belgium. There's a very intensive legal process which has not yet been completed in Britain, so every country where we have this process, where the local lawyers and the local organizations have to launch the lawsuit locally, but it is within a network which is coordinated by the BDS movement.
Yeah.
That's where we were able to get precedence, and that's very important, because if we get a victory in one country, it has tremendous impact on other countries. And Germany, which is maybe the last country on earth that will take the right moral stance on genocide. Really, we have to acknowledge this very sad fact.
Yeah.
But even the German court has ruled basically against the group of lawyers, mostly Palestinian lawyers in Germany, who filed a lawsuit against the arms exports. But the court couldn't say Germany is allowed to sell weapons to Israel in a time of suspicion of genocide. Even a German court cannot say this. So the court said, we're rejecting the lawsuit based on our understanding that there are no arms export permits. And this is based on a loophole. I don't want to bore you with the shenanigans of the German government and how they hide the weapons that they're selling and how they're lying. It's not that interesting. But it is something that we can expose.
Shenanigans, for sure.
Yeah. They did claim in the International Court of Justice, that's something we can talk about as that case advances, that they announced at the beginning of the genocide very proudly that they had increased tenfold the value of the export licenses. And they said the government itself, the German federal government, bragged about how much weaponry it was sending. But when it came to the International Court of Justice case brought by Nicaragua for Germany's full partnership in this genocide, the Germans claimed all of a sudden, oh no, we're not actually sending that many weapons. And so we can see how they're lying. But let's shift focus for the time we have left. We have just a few minutes left. Yesterday, Shir, the New York Times published a sensational article in which Israel's generals attacked the political leadership of Israel and put forward the view that Israel can't win a military victory against Hamas and there needs to be a ceasefire agreement. It's headlined, Israeli generals low on munitions want a truce in Gaza. And we don't have time to talk about the whole article now, but I just want to draw your attention to a particular passage, which I'm going to read for our listeners. And it says, the war is the most intense conflict that Israel has fought in at least 4 decades, and the longest it has ever fought in Gaza. In an army largely reliant on reservists, some are on their third tour of duty since October and struggling to balance the fighting with their professional and family commitments. It also says that fewer reservists are reporting for duty, according to military officials, and officers are increasingly distrustful of their commanders amid a crisis of confidence in the military leadership, propelled in part by its failure to prevent the Hamas-led attack in October. Can you talk about the ongoing disintegration of Israeli society?
I have a lot to say about this article, and you said we only have a few minutes left, so you're going to have to interrupt me, but I'm fine with that. So
we want to hear what your views are.
Sure. Well, first of all, the interesting response to this article from Netanyahu put me in a very awkward situation where I have to agree with him. I don't like to be in that position, because he said those are the winds of defeat that we're seeing, and I have to agree that these are indeed the winds of defeat. But I do want to say that the New York Times article here is written from a very US-centric perspective, because they put the munitions on the headline, and of course, being so interested in the military embargo, this is my role. Of course, the ammunition interests me a lot, and I'm trying to stop it. But if we address the reality on the ground, what Israel is running out of even more than ammunition is soldiers. And that's something that the New York Times didn't, even in this passage that you highlighted, is only the tip of the iceberg, what's really happening. Because first of all, the Israeli government, they forced these reservists to stay in Gaza and to fight for 8 months straight. This is something that is certainly the colonialist soldiers that see themselves as superior in every way to Palestinians and are allowed to do whatever they want. The fact that they cannot go home after 8 months and they have to keep living in Gaza is something that shatters their whole colonial perspective. And I've read a fascinating article by an Israeli journalist who was embedded with these soldiers. And of course, this journalist is not criticizing the genocide, but the journalist pointed out that every officer in Gaza carries packets of cigarettes in order to tip the soldiers, because there is an economy of cigarettes that has developed among the soldiers in Gaza, as if they're prisoners in a prison. They've developed their sub-economy with cigarettes. Soldiers will not obey orders unless they're paid with cigarettes. Can you imagine a military force that the officers have to tip the soldiers so that they will clean the base? And when I say base, of course, I mean stolen Palestinian homes that they've appropriated, and they sleep in these homes. But they're just not cleaning after themselves, and the officers have to pay them with cigarettes to get them to do this. So this also speaks volumes to the collapse of discipline and the military structure. Now, the government has decided to enact a law, or an executive order, to extend the reserve duty for another year, which means that all the soldiers that are already in their 40s and expected to leave active military duty and be released from the reserve were told, no, you're going to stay for another year, just this year when you're supposed to be released, which the Israeli Supreme Court has shot down this executive order and said, no, you cannot do this. So Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, announced that he's instructed the military to recall 15,000 soldiers who were disqualified from reserve duty back to service. I am so relieved that I'm not there, because I've also been disqualified from service, by pretending to be crazy. I never served in the Israeli military, and like me, there are the majority of Israelis actually who didn't serve in the military. And the idea of taking soldiers who were disqualified because of health problems, or because of a criminal record, or disciplinary problems, to force them to go back into Gaza now is, clearly they're not going to make for good soldiers. And in this context, let's talk about the ultra-Orthodox, because that's where the real interesting story is. And I think that's also a problem, especially with Western media, which focuses on the ultra-Orthodox as if they are a representation of the extremist or fundamentalistic part of Jewish society, which is absolutely not true. It's just that they're dressed in a distinctive way, so they make up for good photo opportunities. But in fact, most of them are anti-Zionists. And they've made a decision to make an alliance with the Zionist parties in Israel against their theology, against their beliefs. This alliance goes back to the days of Ben Gurion. They would get some autonomy, they would get some money for their yeshivas, and in exchange, they were released from military service. Ben Gurion just wanted to have a Jewish majority at all costs, and so he wanted these ultra-Orthodox to be part of the Zionist project. But they haven't become Zionists as a result. And now the soldiers are saying, we're not going to serve anymore unless you force the ultra-Orthodox to be recruited as well, because this is an ethnic war, because this is about Jewish identity. So nobody's talking about recruiting the 48 Palestinians into the military. They're talking about recruiting the ultra-Orthodox. Now, I'm following very closely the newspapers of the ultra-Orthodox. They have a few newspapers, and they publish them, and I read them every day, trying to find, is there a crack? Is there any willingness, the smallest kind of willingness, by some rabbi to say, maybe we'll send some of the bad students from the yeshiva so they will go to the army, so we get the seculars to calm down and they will stop harassing us? No, this does not exist. They are clearly saying, we would rather die than go to serve in the Israeli military. There are many reasons for this. I don't think we have time to get into the politics and the theology, but this is a clear statement. And this is a simple fact that the Israeli public is not able to acknowledge, not able to see this. For example, there were some rabbis who said, maybe we'll just leave. We don't have to live in Palestine. We'll just go somewhere else where we don't have to serve in the military. And then Israeli newspapers were reporting, how do they think they can leave if we recruit them? Then they don't have the right to leave the country through the airport because they are candidates for the military draft. So the idea is these people will be recruited against their will, and that is somehow going to make them into soldiers that are actually going to fight for the side of Israel. This is unlikely. And Haaretz newspaper, which is supposed to be a little bit more attached to reality, but it's not, came up with this brilliant idea that all Palestinians 48 are supposed to vote for Benny Gantz, who will become the prime minister and will have enough of a majority to be able to form a coalition without the ultra-Orthodox, which would make it possible for him to force their recruitment. So the idea is that the Palestinians 48 are somehow supposed to vote for somebody who would recruit the ultra-Orthodox to kill their family members and their people in Gaza, and that's something they're supposed to want to do. So that tells you something about the reality perception of mainstream Israeli society right now.
Maybe they need to pass a law to require Yair Netanyahu to come back from Miami and go to Gaza. Maybe that would be something that Israelis
for morale,
could form a consensus around. What do you think, Nora?
That would be a step, right? Incredible. Well, we have so sad we have to wrap up with you today, Shir. There's so much more we always want to ask you, and so we'll have you back on as soon as possible. But thank you so much for your insights. As always, you are a political economist. You're also the military embargo coordinator with the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions National Committee. Yep.
I just wanted to, again, Nora, just point people, we had that hour-long conversation with Shir about a month ago. It's on our YouTube channel. It was fascinating. We covered a lot more, but we didn't cover enough, which is why we had you back, Shir, and we're only getting started. So if you'll agree, we'd like to have you come back on again soon.
Of course.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Shir.
Thanks for having me.
See you soon.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit like, leave a comment. These engagements help us with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps us to get around Silicon Valley censorship as much as possible. It does make a difference. You can also support our journalism by going to electronicintifada.net and clicking on donate now. Thank you.